All right. Hello and welcome to video 1.2. This is lesson 1.2, European Origins of American Government. By this point, you should have mastered Objective 1.1 from lesson 1.1, where we talked about politics and government. And now we're going to really start getting into the beginnings of the US government, right? Which is what this whole course is about. We've laid the groundwork, we've distinguished between what is politics, what is government, we've discussed the 5 functions of government, okay? And hopefully you have in your mind some examples of what those 5 functions look like. So now we sort of diverge from that and really begin to dig into American government, where it comes from, and this will eventually lead into the discussion of, is America a democracy or republic, which we'll get into in lesson 1.3. But for now, what is today's objective? So by the end of this lesson, the student will be able to articulate the differences between Athenian democracy and Roman republicanism. The student will also be able to summarize the big ideas contributed to the field of political theory by John Locke, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Okay. So to begin, we have to start in ancient Athens. Okay, this is in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. BCE means before the Common Era, and it's a term historians use to describe an ancient period of time. Okay, so this is a long time ago. Here's a map of Europe. Where are we talking about? We're talking about down here in Greece, okay? Specifically the city of Athens, or what they would have called a city-state, meaning that it's basically a city operating as its own country. Okay, so Greece was not what we would consider it nowadays. It wasn't one big entire country. It was a group of cities operating by themselves. Now, what is democracy? So make sure you're looking at your guided notes up at the top. Democracy comes from 2 Greek roots, demos, the people, and kratos, meaning power. So if we put those together, we get democracy, which is power by the people or power of the people. So how is this manifested? It looks like this. You vote, right? How did people show their power? They voted. That is direct democracy, pure democracy. You've probably seen this before, right? Teacher asks, okay, here are your 2 options. We'll take a vote, right? And you raise your hand. Okay, that's the purest example of democracy. What did ancient Athenian democracy look like? Well, there were 4 main features. Okay, first of all, every citizen was expected to participate actively in the democracy. Okay, there was also a council of citizens, which met 40 times per year to discuss important issues. Random citizens were selected to hold political office. Okay, they were just simply they drew straws. Okay, whoever got it, they were the ones that had to hold the office, which was a political job. And then finally, courts handed down decisions from juries made up of citizens selected at random, and this is very similar to our modern day jury process. Okay, if you commit a big enough crime, you, by law, have to have the trial heard by a jury of your peers. Okay, so this is very similar. Now, to back it up a second, who was a citizen? What constituted a citizen? Well, you had to be a man, first of all, and you had to be wealthy enough to own land. Okay, and you also had to be freeborn. You could not have been born a slave. Yes, ancient Greece had slavery, although it's not the slavery that you're probably thinking of in, American history, which was a race-based slavery where only people of color could be slaves. In ancient Greece, a slave was anybody who was perhaps captured in war, okay, and then sold, right? It was really anybody. Anybody could suddenly become a slave, okay, if they were sold into slavery. There were some problems with democracy, though. And some major Greek thinkers realized this. Okay. The first was Plato, this guy on the left. So Plato said, look, in a democracy, people are ruled by their beliefs. Okay, so if enough people believe something, then that's going to become the norm, and that's going to affect how people make their decisions. So he said democracy is not a good thing. There's no true knowledge. People are not guided by true knowledge. That's what he said. The second thinker was Thucydides. Again, these are both Greeks. Now, Thucydides was a historian, so he understood the story of Greece, and he saw that in ancient Athens, it was very easy for the people, for the commoners, to be influenced by somebody who was very charismatic, who could speak really well, who had what seemed like good ideas. Okay? To Thucydides, this was a problem. It means that the people weren't thinking for themselves, they were simply going with what seemed the best, what seemed to be a good idea. And if someone was charismatic enough, was a good enough speaker, was convincing enough, then he could get all the people to agree with him, and they would vote in support of him. Okay, so these were the two main problems with democracy that these guys came up with. So then we fast forward a bit of time, okay, to the Roman Republic. Okay, so by this time, Greece had essentially been defeated. They'd fell, okay, because several hundred years had passed at this point. And we're now at 509 to 27 BCE. Again, this is an ancient period of time, but slightly closer to us in terms of history, all right? So now we're talking about this area of the world down at the bottom of Europe, modern day Europe. Okay, the Roman Republic would have extended throughout the boot of Italy. Okay, so this is the area that we're talking about down here. Okay, so there were three chief features in the Roman Republic. First of all, there were assemblies of citizens who voted, just like in ancient Athens. Okay, so that feature of ancient Athens carried over. There was also the Senate, which was made up of senators who were appointed by consuls. And the consuls, or the chief magistrates, were elected into office by the assemblies. Okay, so you see how the three are working together, right? Consuls elected by assemblies. Consuls select the senators. Okay, so they're all three working together. How is power separated? Okay, there were three distinct branches here. You had the two consuls, you have the Senate, and you have the assembly. Okay, let me get my pointer here. There we go. So the consuls oversaw the work of other government officials. Okay, that was one of their primary jobs. Okay, they were the guys in charge, right? They were the top dogs. They also acted as judges in cases, in court cases. They directed the army in wartime. Okay. Interestingly enough, they were elected for only 1 year. Okay, so that if they wanted to keep going, they had to get re-elected by, again, the assembly. Both consuls, so again, there were two of them, they worked side by side, had to agree before the government could take any action, before the government could make any decision, pursue any policy. They had to agree. In an emergency, which sometimes happened, the consul could choose a dictator to make quick decisions. Okay, so this is someone that could go beyond the need for the two to agree, and they could just make decisions by themselves. And then finally, as was already mentioned, the consuls got to choose senators. Sorry, I don't know why that's still coming up. Let's wait a second. But yes, the consuls could choose the senators. All right, so now we get to the Senate, the second branch of government. The Senate held office for life. Okay, so if you were a senator, you were there for as long as you lived. You were also an advisor to the consuls, excuse me, and other government officials. You got to approve or disapprove the laws that the assembly passed. Okay, you had financial power. You decided how money would be spent. This is tax money. You also made decisions concerning relations with foreign countries, which is what we would nowadays call foreign policy. And then finally, they had a lot of influence over the consuls and the army because these were generally very wealthy men, often with their own estates. They had servants, they had slaves, they had a lot of land, which is where their money came from because they would produce crops. Those crops would be sold every year. Okay, these were wealthy men and they had power as a result. Finally, we get to the third branch, the assembly. So this was a group of citizens and they voted on laws that were suggested by government officials. Okay, so they would vote by what we would call direct democracy. So if a majority agreed that the law should be passed, then it was passed. They could declare war, or they could make peace treaties. Okay, they were the ones who elected the two consuls. Okay, so we see that connection between the two branches here. And then finally, they elected other government officials. Okay, so if they wanted to appoint somebody in charge of taxes, overseeing, the tax body, then they could elect that person. Okay, so now we see the different roles, the different tasks that the three branches had to take on. Okay, so hopefully you've gotten those notes down. If not, please go ahead and pause this and jot these down. Okay. So quick check-in. Ancient Athens gives us the concept of democracy, which we also know to be rule by the people. This means that citizens indicate their desires through voting. Majority wins. Okay, this is not an unfamiliar concept to us. From the Roman Republic, we get the concept of a republic, or rule by the representative. So the senators, the assembly, they were not the people themselves. They were people representing the people. Okay, this is a very important distinction that we'll get into more. So instead of the people themselves making decisions, it's the representatives who are voting to decide issues of public importance, to decide what policies should be pursued. Okay. Finally, the Roman Republic also is where we get the concept of a separation of powers between the different branches of government. Remember, the branches of government for the Roman Republic were the two consuls, the Senate, and the assembly. Okay, so they all had to work together. So let's fast forward in time. We get to Enlightenment Europe. So this is the 1700s or the 18th century. Okay. So it's important to know that after the Roman Republic fell, and for most of European history, the most common form of government was a monarchy. A monarchy is a king, a queen, a prince, a princess, anyone who rules over a group of people with absolute authority. So the kings and queens of Europe claimed they ruled by what we would call divine right. And this meant that they had been given absolute authority by God himself. At least this was their claim. Okay, so it was this belief in themselves that led them to do exactly what they wanted. And it's, more importantly, what gave the people the faith in their king or queen. It's what they told themselves to say, okay, look, the king can do what he wants. God has given him this job to lead us, to rule over us, because we can't make decisions ourselves. Okay. But then we get to the Enlightenment period of time. Okay. And this was an interesting time in Europe. Okay. It was when people were thinking differently. They were saying, well, hang on. Why does the king have this power? Who gave him this power to begin with? Okay. What would be the best form of government? Okay, these were the questions that these guys during this period of time were asking themselves, all throughout Europe. Okay. So out of this period of time, there came 5 big Enlightenment ideas. Okay. And these were groundbreaking. Okay, they were revolutionary. And in fact, they would eventually lead to revolutions: the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. Okay. So the 5 big ideas. First of all, reason. This was saying that the human mind has the power to think and to consider. Okay. In fact, the Enlightenment was sometimes called the Age of Reason. So it was this belief that humans could come up with what was best. They could think their way to a solution. They could think their way to a better form of government. They could think their way to peace, to justice, to liberty. Okay. Second was this idea of natural laws. And this was that the laws that steer human nature, that dictate what you and I do in given situations, can be discovered through the process of reason, right? Which is the power of the human mind to think and to consider. The third big Enlightenment idea was that of progress. And this said that humans can attain something better. We can work towards something better, more significant, more helpful, just better for society, progress. And we today still have this term, progressive. If somebody says they have progressive politics, it means that they are constantly trying to improve people's lives, okay, make society better, progress, okay. The fourth was liberty, and you've no doubt heard this term before. The Enlightenment thinkers thought that people ought to be able to, they should be free to think and feel and believe exactly as they like. So long as it didn't hurt somebody else, they should be free to think and feel and believe whatever they want. And this led into the fifth Enlightenment idea, which was that of toleration. And this said that people should have religious freedom. They should be free to believe what they want. Okay? They should be free to believe in God if they want or not. They should be free to be Catholic or Protestant or Baptist or Methodist or whatever. Okay? They just wanted they wanted people to have tolerance, which is the idea that I will live my life, you live your life, I'm not going to judge you for what you believe. We can just live in peace and harmony. Okay, so these were the 5 big Enlightenment ideas. So finally we get to the 3, really quick, the 3 Enlightenment thinkers. Okay, and these were the guys that were really grappling with the 5 Enlightenment ideas. And they were beginning to consider what the best form of government would be. Okay, so the first one is John Locke. He lived from 1632 to 1704, and he wrote a really important book called The Second Treatise on Civil Government. And in this book, he argues that people are born with natural rights. Remember, we just learned about natural laws. Okay, over here, the laws that steer human nature can be discovered through reason. Well, John Locke said people are born with natural rights. Okay, you get these because you were born, because you took your first breath. And this includes life, liberty, and property. What he meant by that was the right to own property, okay? The right to buy land or buy a house or buy a cow, buy a horse, whatever, okay? Natural rights, life, liberty, and property. He also argued that people form governments to protect their life, their liberty, and their ownership of property, okay? So he's saying that we come into this earth, we come into this world with natural rights, and through the process of society, we form governments in order to protect these natural rights. Therefore, Locke says, government is a contract between a ruler and his or her people. A contract, an agreement between his or her people. All right, so that was John Locke. The second big thinker was Charles de Montesquieu. Okay, this is a French guy. Born 1689, he lived until 1755. So he also wrote a book, and it was called The Spirit of the Laws. And in this book, he argues that the best form of government consists of 3 branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Remember back in video 1.1 when I talked about the 3 forms of government power. Okay, they were executive, legislative, and judicial. So here, Charles de Montesquieu is taking those powers of government and putting them into 3 branches, 3 parts of government. Now, you also might be thinking, hang on, 3 branches, that sounds a lot like the Roman Republic, and you are correct. Here, though, Montesquieu is giving a distinct branch to the judicial function. He's saying there should be a function where laws are interpreted and where disputes are resolved. Okay. So he reasoned that if power is separated, government power is separated, then no single branch can have too much of it and thus won't become tyrannical. In other words, become the ruler of all the branches. All right, so these were Montesquieu's big ideas. The third thinker was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was also a French thinker. He lived from 1712 to 1778. And in his book, The Social Contract, he argues that power, or what we would call sovereignty, doesn't lie with the ruler, but with the governed. In other words, the people that the ruler governs. They're the ones with the real power. This is his idea. Okay. Keep in mind that up until this point, everybody in Europe had been ruled by monarchs, people who ruled with absolute authority, people who ruled believing that God himself had given them the crown, had put them in power. This was a groundbreaking idea. This was revolutionary for Rousseau to say, no, 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 no. The power lies with the people, whom the ruler rules over. Okay? Thus, Rousseau says, the ruler is the servant of their people. If they do not do what the people want, then the people have the right to replace the ruler with someone else. Think of how groundbreaking this is. Rousseau is saying to the king, look, if you're not fulfilling your function, if you're not giving the people what they deserve, what they want, because after all, the people are the ones with the real power, says Rousseau, then you, king, queen, whomever, should be kicked out of office. And in fact, later on, these ideas would influence the French revolutionaries, and they would eventually execute their king and their queen. Okay? These were really radical ideas. So now we're getting to the end of this video, and we've been leading up to, this whole video has been about what influenced the founding fathers. Okay? There was Greece, there was Rome, there were the Enlightenment thinkers. Okay? So the American founding fathers would, in fact, later read the works of Locke, of Montesquieu, and Rousseau, and find that they agreed. They believed that with these ideas, they could establish a good form of government, the best form of government possible. Okay. Who were these guys? Well, there were lots, but the 3 big ones, the 3 main ones to mention right now, would be George Washington, who was, of course, our first president, okay, and commander-in-chief of the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. There was also Benjamin Franklin. He was never a president. Okay, although he is, of course, on our $100 bill. But he was a politician, he was a statesman, and he had a lot of important ideas that would later influence, that would influence these guys, the other founding fathers. Okay, he was a great thinker. And finally, Thomas Jefferson. Okay, he was the author of the Declaration of Independence. He helped with the Constitution. He signed the Constitution, which would be our body of laws. And he would later serve as our 3rd president. Okay, so what's important to understand here is that the ideas of Greece and Rome, their forms of government, okay, democracy, a republic, would eventually be picked up again by Rousseau and Locke and Montesquieu as they themselves were grappling with the question of what is the best form of government. Okay. Then we get to the founding fathers. We get to the beginnings of America as a nation. And now they're the ones reading what Rousseau said, what Locke said, what Montesquieu said, and beginning to grapple themselves with the question of what type of government should America be? Because after all, America at that point did not have a government. It was a clean slate. It was going to be a new opportunity to start fresh, which is something that no country in Europe had had. So that is why in the next video, we're going to talk about whether America became a democracy or it became a republic. Did it mold more to the model of Greece, or did it mold more to the model of Rome? Okay, and we'll see those distinctions in the next video. So we will see you next time.